I think it's fantastic. Everybody's coming together. It's absolutely amazing how we're coming back in formation lines of screens and adaptation location of holographic settings of our own compute system of programs. Running a program is understanding a computer interface. What is a computer interface? Well, it's one direction setting to another's applications. How to communicate to one is how to connect to another. So try to frame your line centers to understand. You know how to use your computers. That's great. That's great. That's fantastic, right? Excellent. Now you know how to use a computer. Now you understand how to use yourself as a computer. Computer has the same thing, except in positions, you guys are in higher levels of frequencies understand that computers are only good for a certain time until you understand to get a new model of its design. See, it's a certain lines of frequencies that sets its set location to its settings and where it is in travel. So in that set line condition, you have to keep buying new computers over time. You, as a computer, you don't need to buy. Okay, it's all storage. It's all main. It's the mainframe. It's the longitude, the latitude, the coordinates, the streaming. Okay, it's the bandwidth of space that's inside you that you hold. Okay, so understand that is understand how a computer turns on, how a computer turns off, right? So when a computer comes in like calculation settings, it comes in a remote, anything through sleep mode, anything of that track like connection system, track to its communication lines of its servers, or anything through track calculation setting to its operational system. You're working with yourself as a computer and what it does through its settings. Okay, so get into that system. Starting calculation to understand with all set lines when it comes into your system, when it comes to transistors. What is a transistor? What is a binary? What is the format of a binary? What is a capacity, volume, mass? Understanding the light switch of the transistors, the receivers, transmitting and receiving. What are you transmitting and receiving? What is this all about? Well, it's all about understanding. If you don't understand yourself through a computer, how are you going to understand anything through voice? Has a voice command center, has a correlation setting, have a box line conditions, has inputs and outputs, and has an audio. So we have to start understanding how our computer works for us to see yourself as a computer in here. Okay. So for example, in position and track settings, let's work with calculation line streams. I sent you guys a very powerful video on TikTok how a computer understands its reading system of its memory. I'll set like conditions, right? So I got 0 equals 1, right? Oh, look at that, light bulb. Light bulbs, all right? So I change the pattern of communication, we turn it back on, sets lines of 1 equals lines of 2, and set lines equals lines of 3 in set location. Okay? So we all understand how this all works. So when you turn on a light, that's 0. And when you turn it off, that's 1. Okay. Now, if you want to change the pattern, that depends on your emotional system. You can change it to 0, 0, 1. All right. So that's 2 patterns. So that's on, that's off, and that's on. That's 101, right? 101 equals lines calculation line interference in set locations and settings, right? 101. So in that track line conditions, it's identity. That's how a computer reads its system. That's how a computer understands identification through all levels of codes, through notifications or anything calculations that you buy a product. Everything has a code identification. It's all computer programming through decoding, and in set location through settings. Coders and codecs. All right, so 101, okay, 101, use locations into X line, into 1000. Okay, that's the product. From all indications of 0 equals 1, light bulb goes on, right? So that's one singularity. Now, one singularity in position location is 0 equals 1. 2 singularities sets line set lines. So the 0 turns into 1 and equals lines of 2. Okay, so so you have to really understand the connection of your transistors, that's equals lines your binaries, that connects to its format in equal lines of its patterns. Okay, so that's how this all works. You have to really understand how a light switch goes on and it goes off. Now, if it has a continuous force line setting, if it goes like this in set lines in this set locations, you are in the center position of your flywheel, right? So it's going okay. This all setting track lines in set position to its operation system and all calculation modification line screens. In track lines, it comes in a higher formation screen lines adaptation. So what happens is in track lines, it disappears. It disappears. We got too many track lines, high center interference. Position of the programs, directing signals, modification. Okay? I'm just showing you exactly what happens. It disappears, but it comes in a translucent. This is the program locations where you come into high calculation to turn it into a hologram of pixelation screens and direct signals. This is you in track locations, living your realities in your holographic city, a set design line conditions, all through traction. That's you now. Through acceleration. Okay? So that's how it starts. You know, every time you turn on that switch, it's changing its numbers. It's changing its letters. It's changing its symbols. It's changing its shapes. Okay? Try to understand how a computer programs its own system, how it communicates to how it communicates. Right? How you doing? I'm fine. How are you? That's great. So what are you doing today? Not much. Just planning on just sitting around. Okay. So getting that setting line conditions, the light is going off in settings, right? Light is going off in settings. So in that position, once you get to a certain platform, you come position track line, you start with 144 in tractions, right? You got the 24 lines, 48 frames, 72 computer frames, and 144 traction. So in the provision line cycles, you travel in 3 calculating line screens, high interference, and set location near settings. All 3 mechanisms high calculation to travel. In all track connections of panels of communications of face recognition. Okay? Face recognition. All right. So now you understand how a computer works. Now you just understand how to operate inside settings. How do we use the zeros and ones? Track location settings, all line set position location system. 0 equals 1. Okay? Light bulb goes on. Basic understanding, right? So when you turn on that switch, it's now 1. When you turn it off, it's now 2. You turn it back on, it's 3, right? You turn it back off, it's 0. Okay? So yeah, exactly, Hendo. It's creating a pattern. It's creating a binary. You're putting all transistors in set location to its setting of its format that creates all calculate, modify in-track location in an algorithm. Creates its program. Now, once it creates its program, it's coming into its own set location to creating its image. And that's coming in track location to all calculate, you guessed it, molecules. So once you understand that, it's a more line calculation setting how to use your system to its locations and sending track locations to your atoms. Getting that position location, sending high interference and position track lines in all line rotation surface in your protons and line calculation setting to your electrons. How to position line calculating line centers, high line communication setting to all direct signal locations of your cells in set locations. All right, security line defense, firewall track lines. It's the divider lines. It's the security line wall and track location that protects everything inside connections. Okay, all through track connections. All right. So it protects the image in set location. That's why you have cells in your body, guys. You have to understand how it uses the modification screens. All right, so in that track line calculation setting, think of a kinetic line interference is sigma and calculation setting in position of programs comes into enigma, setting travel calculation line sent to its program location settings. Zeta, zeta line rotation interference operators location setting position of platforms zeros and ones. Putting position line calculation line centers, get in track lines of 0 equals 1 turns on the light bulb. Okay, we got in that setting, right? So understanding how do I change that 0 to equal line 1 because it changed in the circularities and heights that location of travel lines, right? Singularity 1, singularity 2, right? So this is an on switch, this is an off switch. Okay, sets lines of 2 tracks into 3 track locations, right? So correlate the high interference of 1, 0, set a position location line, set a high interference of 2 and 3 set locations, 1, 0, 2, 3. That's identification code. That's the identity of its line connection, which is VIN, which is its set location identification of its code, which is its base of recognition, right? 1, 0, 2, 3. So you have to get into communication how a computer uses its zeros and ones in its binaries. Now, once you get in your binaries, you get into platform. You get in that platform, you come in your capacity. Capacity is volume, vast, okay? Vast, volume, velocity, okay? So let's go in communication again. Sets lines of volume. Volume equals mass. Mass equals high calculation line centers to E. E equals lines of calculation of 0, equal lines of 1. Sets lines calculation of 1 in calculation equal lines in position of 2. 2 equals lines of 3. 3 line conditions of 4 in track location, right? So identifies line centers of 1 in position of 2, in position of 0, equals lines of 3, because you have to have your 7-digit code setting. That's identification of your tracking device lines and tracking position location all levels, detect high center interference detections in set location. So you got 1, 2, 0, 3 equals lines of calculation 3 lines equals lines of 4, sets position of 7 in track line connection setting. So you got 1, 2, 0, 3 line calculation setting, 3 bracket communication lines. That's your area code. Setting calculation line centers, 120 line position travel calculation line system. 4 lines of setting type position locations in a 7-digit code frame. Direct lines calculation of 7 zeros in track locations. Setting position operation. There it is. Okay, 7-digit code frame of 7 numbers in sequence. There's our area code, 120. Coordinates! But where's it going? To that location, all right? Understanding the VAS, understanding the volume, understanding the volume line settings, the valves, the communication streamlines, direct high calculation line system, volume, vast, velocity equals lines of acceleration, equal lines calculation of mass, and like calculate high interference into all line centers of Mach and set locations, right? So that's the indication where a computer comes into frame. Once it understands its binary, once it understands its transistors, then you understand the format, then you understand the algorithm that's creating its settings to what in set locations. What does a computer create? Its own algorithm. And once it creates its own algorithm through letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, it comes into formation line setting. But this is where it gets tricky because the number sequence line catching zeros and ones go to higher levels of traffic flow. The flow direction of time seeker changes the transistors and set locations that sets up coders of decoders into defrag and fragmentation streamlines and oscillogicalizations in positional colorations and affinity position travels in set location. Very complicated stuff in set locations. All right. All right. So once it recognizes its identification code, it comes into a face recognition. Okay. So try to understand that in Space Discoveries 3 when I'm talking about face recognition, right? Identifying the settings of 1x line at 1x lines of 1 equals lines 2000. Okay? 1x lines of 1 equals 2000, right? That's the identification, that's the product of its program, right? Say calculations of a del in settings, delta heading, energy lines of 2 levels, right? Sets lines, communication lines, center, let's say it's an XJ, sets lines into 3000, set location, right? That's its identification, all right? Now, getting that identification line screens is really understand how to use the zeros and ones and tractions. Teams at 0 and 1, set calculate 0 point line and calculation high interference and position of all levels. The spacing lines is in 0, 1. position locations, dots equals lines of image and set locations. They're here. Set line calculations, high interference. You guys are in factors over pi. Track calculations, quantum line settings, travel calculation, position locations, and center calculation line screens. Setting lines high center interference. Splitting anomalies line center of 0.0 and 0.0. 4 track lines of 3 and positional platforms of communication. Directly calculate this line settings. Get into area codes of 000, 3 track line conditions of 3 lines, equals lines calculation of 3 line rotation centers, 3 position travel lines, puts 3 in the middle, track line condition line centers of 3, sets position of 6, and position location of 9 attractions. Pattern line centers at 3, 6, 9, change the platforms, setting lines of 0, sets lines on switch, set lines of 0, sets lines on switch, sets lines of 2, sets lines off switch, sets lines of 3. Sets communication lines of 0, 2, 3, 3. That's its identification of its product. Okay, so all right, so now it's getting more tricky now because you have to understand how to use it through its binaries. What is a binary? Right, it's a codex. It's a coder. It's a decoder. It's modified settings and set location of SIM. SIM modifies the system navigation screens. But once you understand how to turn on a light bulb, everything comes in formation. If your transistors aren't working in frame lines, you have a transistor in 1, 2, and 3 position of 4 lines of transistors, right? If they all pop out through circuits, they go in a different direction, settings, calculation line system, you're creating a black hole in line condition to its formation. Hoo-ah, okay? So it's very important that you don't allocate position of time sequence to your transistors because it overrides the position location of binaries and box location of your files and track location. Okay? All right, so now you understand how binary communication lines of transitions are create locations. So it's like Christmas lights, right? One goes out, they all go out, right? That's all it is to a binary. Setting lines of codex is understanding the calculation setting, how it works through its competition set line can its operates location setting of its division. Setting calculation energy lines of X line settings. X line 1 equals lines of X line J. Sets lines of X line 2 equals lines of X line 3. Have a code of conduct, calculation high interference of codex, equals lines calculation of 0, 0, and 3, 0 line conditions of 2 travels, and 6 lines of communication, 3 lines of 5, 5 lines of 4. Sets lines of 3 provision to primitive line set location of 0, 0, 0, 3 calculations. Sets position of 2 track lines, sets 3 over pi, 2 operation line set locations. Light switched on in 3 calculations, light switched off in 2 line calculation centers. That puts position line calculation high interference of 300 in set location identification. Okay, complicated stuff, right? All through codecs. All right. So I know that's what it is, Jeps. So you really understand how to use your transistors, your binaries, your capacities, your capacitors, all through time. Time capacitor, body capacitor. All right. Body capacitor has everything inside line condition settings and navigation. You have to really understand how to use it through its codecs, how to use it through its decoder of its coder, in position of modification lines, how to use the binaries, how to use the formats, how to use the patterns, all through zeros and ones. Okay? So every time you turn on the light switch, your motion line setting of its computer changes the correlations of color. And if it changes the correlations of color, it's changing the transistors of its binary. And if it's changing its binary, it's changing its position location of its program and high calculation streamline of its settings. That's where it comes to defrag and fragmentation lines in your oscillological locations in your graph calculation streamlines and high calculation. Point lines of track, colors, right? Color line codex, code of conduct 1. Okay, specifications calculations, right? Code of conduct number 2, orange. Okay, see the location oscillogics, right? So it comes into defrag. Defrag 1, D equals lines of E. And then you have frag equals lines of calculations equals lines, decimal point lines of 1, 0, 0, and 1 line conditions. Okay? Sets position into color lines, screen lines into green. Modification screen lines ready to go, right? In position, right? So it's taking the colors back to green. Okay? So you have to understand the files and track lines. And if you're in red, you're in security. All right, that's probe location setting high lines of transmitters and receivers location near carriers. If it's in red set inside calculation line streams, you have to be careful, okay? Because it overrides the system locations to all levels of your binaries and it formats a new patterns and track location of new line settings. Your number sequence line calculation comes into over factors over pi. That puts you in an overdraft calculation line centers into point track line condition settings, taking you out of zero line position of -0. That's an overdraft. Setting line communication with system travel, okay? Point lines of setting is putting everything back in green in set location, okay? Which brings everything back to 0, okay, in set locations. To your oscillogics and its code of conduct in set location. Multipass. I know, holy Batman. All right, and so at least you're getting a bit of an understanding now how this works in all side in connection settings. See, my voice is changing, right? My connection to the voice line is changing alpha line screen setting location adaptations. So this goes beyond recognitions, guys. This is the platitude line communication setting to understand how a computer has its own memory. And to have its own memory is to understand what it's doing through its own identification, how to set up its binary, how to set up its codes, how to set up its decodes, and how to get in its codings, how to get in its codecs. So these are the things you guys have to understand how this all works through transistors and how to get in that settings, how to turn on a light switch and how to turn off a light switch. And every time you turn it on, you turn it off, it's changing its pattern. And when it's changing its pattern, it's changing its it's voice line, it's alpha line, it's delta, it's theta, it's omega. Okay? So it's really interesting when you understand the zeros and ones and how it comes in all track line conditions of point lines in one location. How to use it in a 4-line cycle. See? That's identification lines of 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 lines, point line in position 1, 4.1. So this is this, 4.1. So in position, that's where it comes in is 0 line calculation. 0 equals lines of 1. Interactions, right? Turns on the light bulb. Okay, lights on. Comes back line centers in position 2 equals lines of 4. Light goes off in set locations. Setting track lines is 0 line calculating line. Light goes on into 3 and 4. Sets lines communications into decimal point 1. Change position line calculating settings in position lines of 4.1 traction into set locations, into its identification graph in its files of its data calculation. Ho! Woo! Look at that. All through transition. Very complicated stuff all through computer, but memory. How it works. All right. So in that calculating line settings, because the team is coming to the now line calculation to its algorithm, it has to understand how to 0 equals 1, how it turns on its light bulb. And that's how it works, right? Once you get in that calculation lines, the zeros are actually creating lines of settings around your system in face recognition. This is where you guys have to get out of the image screens and see yourself as zeros and ones in set location line settings and all travel communications. This is all you are in track line conditions. In set lines and highest position is operational. Hoo-ah. Okay? All through zeros and ones. You're created through an image. Now you got an A track if you want to be an A line, or you can be a B balance, you can be a C, or you can be a D line, or you can be an X line 1. It all depends on where you are in platform. It all depends on where you are in program. It all depends where you are in operation in set locations. All right? But this creates its image. Now we're on the right track. All right, once we get in provision line cycle, the connection to the oscillogics changes patterns of code of conduct. Setting platforms and communication 3 lines of weight position of programs is 4 set locations of files. Calculates modification lines, you open up the files and track locations. Each file has a representation of the view, right? Setting track to its communication setting and all levels of calculation, right? Files and files and files of data and information lines and track locations of nothing lines of zeros and calculations. All right, so I've got 3, 6, 9 line settings, 9 set locations, right, of files. Each file has an indicating line conditions that calculate height and interference in your test rig. Test rig holds the position location to its cube and center position of travel calculate the line settings, height travel its communications program, and position of travel lines. Puts position calculation line settings and all its formation screen lines and high calculation setting to your system and location. Very complicated stuff, right? So the test rig itself has a core generator. That's a time machine. Sets its position location of center, position location of system locations, see? Setting calculation of its programs, see? All through flux capacitor. All right, so once you understand that, then everything comes in a formation line screen, directing lines of high center interference of female polarity into the male polarity position location of travel. Okay? All right. Files indicating lines. Let's go through 3-line signals. 1, 2, 3 above and north. Setting calculation of 3-line centers of 3 position locations into left. Setting calculation line interference of 3 zeros communications of rights. And we have 0 gravity line conditions of programs and set position of bottoms. So we take the 3-track lines, on the line, off switch. It's always in set locations. So it's always going, it's always going up and down, up and down, up and down, right? But it's going faster. And once it gets to the faster line conditions, it can't be at a low frequency because it indicates its overdraft. And if you don't get back and in the zeros and ones and tractions, it changes the deviation screen lines adaptation surface to your 0 ones of your decoders to your codecs and line connects to your binaries that resets your position to the algorithms back in set locations and high calculation line settings of separation. All right. Setting communication lines of 3 sets lines calculation line interference in track locations. Left line settings, left equals lines of 3, sets position lines equals lines of R, travel calculation lines of point lines. Now this is creating an algorithm, which is creating a website. Position lines of 3-line cycles, 3-line continuous high center interference levels. 3-track lines of high interference. Level equals lines of 3 equals lines of 2 equals lines of 1. Sets lines of 3 zeros in track location system. There's its algorithm. There's this website. Ooh-ah. Okay. Very complicated stuff, isn't it? All through binary. All through decoding, coding, codecs, computer operations screen, directing line settings, high interference. The team is ready now. Okay. So getting in that line calculation setting, you really have to understand how to formulate this into its image. The image has to be so high in frequency. If it's not in high, the deviation line screen is going to be underscore of 0 and track locations, overdraft. So you got to bring the minus to get out of the minus line screen, change the lines of patterns back into 0 and 3 set location line screens back in a 4-track location setting in your 7-digit code frame position. Because every computer has its own domain. Whoa. Now the domain is your 7-digit line into 4 zeros and track line conditions. Bracket calculation lines of 4 equals lines of 3 and 3 zeros on communications. That is your identification code of your computer. Now your codex line calculation setting, you can call yourself Del. All right. Into line center locations into 7 equals lines of 3000. Okay, that is your set location of your computer through identification. So all the computer is doing is taking the zeros and ones and basically understanding what it is, so its own identifications. How it comes in its code, how it comes into its defrag, how it comes into its frag, how it comes into its binary, how it comes into its transistor, how it comes into its capacitors, how it comes into its capacity, how it comes into its format, how it comes into its patterns. It all set locations of operation. Okay? Very complicated stuff. All right, so understanding this and position oscillogics, how everything goes back to green, everything goes back to 0 and set location. Okay? Everything goes back to 0, right? And then you get back in modification screen lines, back in set locations, back again, right? So once you understand that, your position track lines, you have to really understand your light switches have to be in a certain frequency. If you go up and you go down and you get a motion line interference going back in traction, your zeros and ones will fall flat and travel in 4 set locations. Okay? You got to put them back in division of point line centers, tracking interference. Again, 4 over line. 3 indicates setting of 7, which is your body frame. The correlation of panels in your DNA track line has a calculation line screens, has slides and communication streamlines of high calculation. Direct the modification lines of cycles and high positional platforms and understanding you through beta waves of crop circles. Direct calculation line interference is a power generation screen line, your solar plex position of travels in all travel communications and all calculation line settings of face recognition. Multipass. Okay? All right. How's everybody doing so far? Trying out what's going on, right? Through the zeros and ones. So that's basically what it is. The actual switch. You're standing there at the wall and you're turning the switch on and off. Okay? All the time. All the time. What confuses its anomaly is when you add a motion line track. Right? So when you add a motion line track, it's kind of like you're going like this. Getting tired. Right? So what happens, you get stagnatic, you get positions line, high center interference, you get all blocked in all setting connections because you can't find a way to keep your switch on. Now, when it goes faster, it disappears in a translucent screen that puts you in your hologram, that keeps you in your hologram, that keeps you in the pixelation. And that's why I keep saying, focus on yourself, stop traveling through motion. So we all have to understand how it indicates. Let's go through set lines of 16 line channels, set lines equal lines of 8. Okay, so that provision lines of 0 equals lines of 1. Okay, that's how it becomes 1, right? Sets lines of communication, turns on the light bulb. Okay, now 6 positions. So that's 6 switches in transistors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You got to separate the 3. Right? Because it overlines the settings, right? In trial calculations of programs or formats, right? 3 zeros in line calculation setting, position locations and setting. All crossing line settings of dash, calculation high position operation locations. All waving line sequence and high interference. So that's lines of 6, 6 in position of provision, right? 6 channels, 6 operations, 1 line signal equals lines of 1 into 8. That's the identification lines of 6618. That's how it reads it through its image and set location. 6618. Okay, all through information line connections, zeros and ones. Right? So try to see yourself in a computer of its memory, basically how to turn on a switch and how to turn off a switch. The whole idea here, guys, is to keep the light on. That's all. So the more you get into that setting, the more you stay in the translucent, the more you come into your energetic domes and you create it through its format and location without its dimensional line scale into its schematics calculation line settings of all levels and coloration patterns and all calculation lines to oscillation system and travel calculation line settings to your binaries and calculation settings to your codecs, line condition decoders, line position locations, activation stream interference, in position locations with no separation or anything through multiplying track and track locations. Graph calculation stream and high position operation. Okay? Keep yourself high in vibrational graphs and keep in line position locations. Don't get yourself into point line tracks in decimal points of 0 or underscore lines of 0 in set locations or anything through negative over positive in set location. Okay? These all 3 signatures and streamline calculation high position location is nothing but an overdraft and transfer location settings to your banking. Okay. So it's pretty basic, isn't it? It's pretty easy to understand what a binary does, right? What it does to its transistors, the switches, you know, right? How you communicate the frame, right? Right? Sets lines of 0, sets lines of 1, sets lines of 3, sets lines of 4, right? This is identification. That's how it reads its settings of 0, in position of 1, in position of 3, in position of 4. That's its identification, 0, 1, 3, 4. Now, correlate high interference of 0 lines of alpha, okay, the high interference of delta into theta, alpha, delta, theta. 3 signature lines equals lines of high calculation setting alpha, delta, theta. Sets communication to a setting, right? Sets calculation line center lines of 1, 2, 3 zeros. Sets lines of calculation line centers and positions into underscore in position of 0. because the calculation of its alpha line has a position of track line that's equals length of communication of its beta wave in communications. Point lengths of tracking calculation. Very complicated stuff, guys. So all you have to understand that all your computers have digital frame of numbers. Okay, you're always indicating line conditions of area code of 3, sets lines of calculation of 7, right? Which is your compute line screen high center interference, which is your digital correlation setting and position travel calculations, which is nothing but an indication line calculation of the phone. So if you understand yourself, there's seven digit lines of 4 zeros in track locations, 4 bracket lines in settings. Setting position 1, 2, 3, 4 portals in communication 1 frame. Direct calculus line equal lines of 3 into 3 zeros in set location 9 settings into 3 frames. Sets correlation setting position and travel calculation lines of 7 frames into hearts. Bracket communication setting lines into the mind and in position located in the soul into 3, 6, and 9 of latitude and positional programs. Files communication line screens and high operation surface and high calculation system and probe calculation line screen and high line rotation of its dimension and portals of communication of face recognition. Okay. I know it's complicated, right? I don't know how to explain it. So you guys really understand how to use the communication line frames of zeros and ones all through your 7-digit code frame, which is your number. That's your identity. That's connecting line interference. What do you think your 7 chakras are? Bodies of water. But bodies of what? What are the bodies of? Plasma. Water equals plasma. All right. So in that position line calculation setting, once you understand how to operate your system through your binaries, through your transistors of your capacity that holds volume, through capacitors, which is through time. Okay. If you get an H line center and setting, plateau calculations. So your identification code is 4 line zeros, 4 track lines equals line. I'll make it easy for you guys. And bracket communication, right? That's your identification, right? That is your 7-digit code number, right? Your computer frame. Now, when you come into all calculation, you know what the XT1000s are, right? They're zeros and ones. 0, 1 calculation. Let's get a plateau number of 0 and position location of 2 zeros, right? Track locations. Let's add a code of conduct and line position of 2 and 2 track line centers above track location. Put position of panels. See the panel communication stream. Directing lines that equal lines at high center. 7 comes into the center of its set locations. 7 line signals, 7 motivations, and triangulation reset position programs. Setting track lines to high center interference, 1 over provision, and 3 zeros in track line connections. 1, 2, 3. Plateau line screens in 1 platform. Sets lines of calculation streamlines into position location your settings and tractions. All through set locations. Which is what? Your solar sail of travel through zeros and ones. Okay, through modification. All right, very complicated stuff, guys. So getting into that track lines, you have to really understand how it sets lines of dividers. Now, the dividers has 2 panels communication that splits the anomalies and track location high centers and position of its operation. So track line communication, this is U interactions. That's U interaction, right? So in line calculation setting, you got plasma wall screens in 3 centers, okay? Plasma wall screens in 4 centers, okay? You have to because it's your division lines of 4 equals lines of 3, which is 7. That's your bodies of water. Indicate platforms that communicate line screen setting high position operation surface. Plateau lines of zeros and ones, 0, 0, 0, position locations. So indicating line connections, the first graph calculation streamline has to be indicating lines of equal line communications in a 3 graph calculation line setting in 7 provision and provision cycles. So you always have to have the indicated screen lines in your system to locations of a 7-digit code frame. Plateau line screen, power generation screen lines into your magnetic highway of information line connections. Calculation lines of your containment, set lines of travel calculation, your torical fields, and line connection to your EMF in orbs, in probing, and set location of travels and set location. Now, directing lines of communication panels, you have to understand how to read your position of your computers and all track line connections of what's above and what's below in set locations. What's above and what's below. What is that now? Light on, light off, light on, light off, right? Now, the platitude division line calculation string, when it comes to yin and yang, it's the process calculation line centered. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's this on a clock, right? Sets correlation setting and positional point centers in track location of 0 equals 1. Sets line condition high center interference in process communication that sets line division line condition settings in all levels of all provocation setting of yin and yang. See? That's the process, how it works through 0 and 1. It has to go forward in a 4-track location when you're looking at your clock. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And once you get to 12, you're going faster. You go from 12 to 24 to 48 to 72 to 144, right? But you're always moving forward. Yin and yang is the process of why there's an indicated here and why is there indicated here. Why isn't it not here and why is it not here? It's got to move forward. It's got to go forward. And when it's going forward, it's always in provisions of 4 in position of 3. Check this out. Now, this is interesting. This application where it comes in yin and yang. Yin and yang processes its position location of travels. Okay? So it's all about understanding from this into this in set location, how it changes its phenomenon. It's set connections of 6 and 9, both in track locations, into your box in set location of 3. 4 provision lines of 1, 1, 1, 1. 4 track line connections equal lines of 3, which is 7, right? That's how it comes in provision lines, and you're always going to see direct and redirect location of yin and yang. The process position locations and center line calculation line center is track locations. 4 lines of provisions and 3 track locations, right? Female cycle, male cycle. That's why you see the yin and yang of its process in track location to its system. Okay, isn't that amazing? So the 4-track is in the male, and the female track is the 3. That's the yin and yang. Now, the process of this position location is to understand how to create the infinity 8 in travel calculation lines of point lines of travels in higher levels of dimension line set locations, how an on switch goes on and an off switch goes off and set locations of zeros and point ones equals lines of calculation lines switching and singularities and set location. Okay? Mega multipass. Getting your position line connections is creating your line settings into your calculation system in all track lines in your flywheel of track location. All through set design. Okay? Unifications, right? Right? You see it, right? You see what I'm talking about? See what it is now? You see it as the track locations and all line centers of pi in high calculation line centers and high track location in your system and travel position location in your settings in all line rotation surface in all calculation system of face recognition. Okay. All right. So, wow. So much to say, to everyone, how this all works through binaries, coming into all levels of your transistors, understanding the switches, and that's all this is, right? That's all this is. Now, once you understand your bandwidth and your streaming, your longitude and latitude, then you understand your coordinates. Wow. Understanding coordinates to what? Where are you going through frame? So all you're doing is you're creating a film strip. That's all you're doing. But it's how to create it through its picture frame. How to create it through its picture frame. Okay? That's all it is. So it gets much easier once you understand the track connection line centers of 4 in setting. Right? It says location of the sun and the moon and all modification line settings of face recognition. Okay? Face recognition is just basically getting to the modification of identity. It knows exactly what it's doing through zeros and ones. So it really has to understand the on switch to understand the off switch. Because like I said, with the TikTok video, you have 2 singularities, right? Set lines of 1 equals lines of calculation. That's why you have the equal line in position. And what's above is the north, and what's below is the south, right? So on switch, okay, is 0, okay? So off switch equals lines, high calculating is 1, okay? Now, to change that pattern over here, sets lines of 2, right? Sets lines of offline is 3, okay? Sets positions back online is 4, right? And that's your behavior that's changing its pattern, which is changing its transistors, which is changing its code of conduct, which is changing its codecs, which is changing its defrag, which is is changing its fragmentation, which is changing the coloration, which is changing the oscillogics, which is changing its program, which is changing its interface, which is changing its operation. Okay? But that's how a computer works in set location. Okay? So once you understand how it comes in modification to zeros and ones, you get past that line, it's creating its own traffic flow of its Omni highway of numbers, letters, shapes, and symbols, starting with the 12 provision cycles of zeros and ones. Now, once you get into that, you get a platitude line connecting high interference of symbols, letters, and shapes in a 12-line cycle, right? 12-line cycles of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols to start with, and then you get a higher line communication of traffic flow. Once you get into that, you get into your Omni highways, which is your data processing business locations, to your decoders of coding settings, to that coding activation stream. So it gets much easier if you understand how the zeros work through on and off switch. Okay, because every time you turn it on and turn it off, you're in a different motion. So when you're more happy, your endorphins kick in, you can go up to higher lines of numbers. If you're depressed or anxiety or stress, you go beyond the numbers, which is below, which is an overdraft. So you don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be negative and positive. You want to be positive and negative. You don't want this, you want that. But to understand this is to understand that. To understand up is to understand down. So what's on is what's off. Okay, on, off. And the equal line connection is the equal sign, which is your settings to your Merkaba, a set location, your flywheel that keeps you in balance in set location. Mega pass. Okay, all through on switching of all calculation settings. So your transistors, your binaries, and all calculation, right, to its format and its patterns. All right. So that's how a computer works. Okay. You get a better understanding now how powerful it is and what you're coming into. And every time you change your emotional system, it affects you through zeros and ones. Deviation, separation. Right? Sound tones. Anything in that calculation. Right? So we have to see ourselves through a computer, how it works, through its binary, through its transistors, of its capacity, of its capacitors, of its formats, of its patterns in set location to create its anomalies of what? An algorithm. Okay? How does everybody feel about that now? What's above, what's below? So now you understand that, right? How that works, the equal line connections. It's the balance that you've got to keep in that continuous flow, and how it works through the yin and yang of a force continuum that's always, always, always moving forward in a 4-track lines to a 3 calculation at 7 provision in center, which is your 7-digit code frame. 7 line connection settings of travels, and use your area code to higher calculated lines of coordinates and higher levels of space anomalies and track location of dimensions and higher lines of planetary calculations of surface and location of inner line connection. Okay? Simple, isn't it? It's easy, right? For me, it's easy because I know who I am. And that's what people are trying to get into. They're comfortable where they are, but they don't realize they have to have an on switch to off switch to understand their system. If you don't have an on switch and off switch, how are you going to understand the difference? Boom, lights on. Boom, lights off. Change pattern, change zeros, change ones. I get happy. My endorphins kick in. Serious A, serious B, right? All the way to F, right? So that switch is now disappeared, but you're there through translucent in position of holographic and set position to its pixelation. Okay? And that's what you got to stay into settings. But understanding you from an on switch is understanding you through an off switch. how it changes your computer of its mainframe of its interface. Okay? All through zeros and one setting location of set line connections. Point lines of track and high centers. Okay? And moved in set location. Zeros and ones. Platitude line connections in travel. Point lines of settings. And all position locations. Directing lines of panel communication surface. Okay, get in that set location line system. So when you get excited, it offlines the communication to digital pad, right? So I got to get back instructions and set locations back to 0 and 1. See? Being off is also not understanding how to be on. On grid, off grid. Oh my gosh! So my zeros equals lines of 1 is now changed in position locations into underscore or into negative over positive. Oh no. I don't want that. You don't want to be in position location of setting lines. So let's say you start off with 0, 1. You're doing well. Da, 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 happy, and then. So you're way below beta in setting, right? So the zeros and ones changes tractions. So the 0 sets here, and the 1 sets here, but its position and align connection settings in minus. Okay? Solar graph calculation streamline position of travel. Right? That's how it travels. That's how letters, numbers, shapes travel. They travel through their own solar sails. So that's what you're doing through provision. So you're in high calculation mode, and then you go into all calculation low mode, right? You're in line connection, high center interference, and verification setting being sat. So the actual zeros and ones change the position location of positive and negative. Sets and lines of negative, sets lines of overdraft, sets position program location setting, overcharge, override, and overcalculate high position to its setting in chart calculations. All through zeros and ones. All right? So that's what happens through provision when you guys get emotional. Don't get emotional, okay? Because the on switch and the off switch will get in a stagnatic setting, okay? Your flywheel will be off position of traction, okay? You got to get back in balance line connections, right? And set locations. Now, once you get back in balance, it creates its atom and set location of rotation to a setting line calculation setting of yin and yang of process in track locations so you're back on traction. Hoo-ah! Okay, so it's really interesting when you look at that as a continuous flow. Now you understand why you have an indicating line screen, a high position location line center location at 12 in track location. You got a clocking system, right? 12 here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 4 line panel, right? Sets position location calculates line streams. So that 4 line indicates high position location settings, right? So every time it goes to that, it goes to a portal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 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 portal, right? All through a clock. So you're starting line calculating line settings. Now the 4 line setting, 4's here, okay? 3's here. Yin and yang here. Whoa! There we go through clocking lines of yin and yang. Process position of balance lines and center lines in your flywheel communication. Keep that balance. Don't off calculation your settings because it changes your multiple line centers of travel and calculation. It disappeared. See? It's there. See? You've got to stay balanced. Understand your on switch is understand your off switch. Okay? Mega multi-pass. How does everybody feel about that now? How to really understand how this all works inside locations. What's above and what's below. Now you understand the indication of what yin and yang is the process locations, where the male polarity is at a 4-line setting and position location of the female cycle is a 3-line setting. You put that together, you got yin, yang, yang. Okay? So I think that's good. So you get a little bit more understanding how this is all working for you in transformation. How to use the on switch and the off switch locations, your binaries, and also location your settings is also locations. See you in 5. Adios.